Welcome to my humble garage. This is our 2004 Mazda RX-8. Like many Mazda RX-8s, this one has been LS swapped. Fortunately though, we got a set of bad lifters, and about 100 miles into the break-in, it started tapping. So, looks like we're going to have to do a little more work on it, and I'm going to take you along for the ride. This car was one of my wife's childhood dream cars. They're really neat. I like the chassis. Has a double wishbone front suspension, multi-link in the rear. It handles great. It's a neat looking car. It has some really cool features. The door and the way it opens is kind of sick, especially if you have kids like us. So, you have your regular door. The back has a suicide door. So, kind of neat. Interesting little features. And the problem with the car from the factory is it comes with a rotary. They're neat motors, they're a lot of fun. You can take them to like 10,000 RPMs, but they don't last. Some people only get around 60,000 miles out of the rotary engine, and that wasn't going to work. They didn't like short trips, and at the time when we bought this, that's kind of all we did is short trips. So we had to do something else. We're good with motors. We had a performance tuning shop at the time, so hey, let's LS swap a Mazda RX-8. So this was probably late 2019, it was early 2020 when we found this car. It was 80,000 miles on the clock, manual car, down in Louisiana, and we didn't really expect it to run. It didn't. We probably put maybe 30 miles on it before it decided it was going to not start because the apex seal started leaking. So, yay, project time! We have a TR6060 manual transmission out of a 2010 Camaro. It's chassis mounted, gives a nice positive feel. We are actually using a prototype microcontroller down here to get a Holley to run the gauges. There's a Holley HP right under that panel there. In front of the TR6060 is a 4.8 liter right now with a cam in it. We're using a spec clutch. It has a standard weight flywheel. I feel like that's probably more appropriate for a 4.8. There were a lot of modifications that had to really go into this build. We had to move the brake master cylinder, so I converted all of that to AM lines through different adapters and things. I didn't like where the coils were on top of the valve cover, so I made some pretty valve covers for my wife. We're using a custom master cylinder for the clutch. I can't off the top of my head remember what that is. We are able to use the factory electric steering in this car since I'm emulating the stock ECU with the Holley. The cooling system came out nice in my opinion. I've got a Chevy Aveo coolant reservoir, and I have this hooked into the heater core line, kind of like you would on a Corvette. Steam port runs to it, and the vent from the top of the radiator runs to it as well. These are the stock radiator fans. The radiator is a slightly newer aftermarket radiator, just an aluminum cheapie. It's good enough. For the exhaust, we're using LS3 manifolds that I had. They go down to a smaller Y pipe. We don't need really a whole lot of exhaust flow. This isn't a race car, it's a fun car. And in the back, we actually have an 8.8 out of a Ford Thunderbird. It was actually from my first race car that I had built. So one of the downsides of having to cram the motor in there is there isn't a lot of room. For instance, right down here, normally these coils, they even sit on top of the valve cover, and there just isn't clearance to work on anything. What we've identified is the lifter that is tapping is on this side, and we don't have enough room in the back to get that cylinder head off with the brake booster there, so it's got to come out. So what's next? What do we do to get it running? My thought is we've got a good bit of room here. Let's back it into this corner. Let's get the back up on some jack stands, put the front on race ramps, front facing this direction. Try and get it backed into this corner as far as we can, and that'll give us enough room to use that engine hoist to pull the motor and transmission out that door. So we'll get it out of the car, and then we will need to work to make a nice solid motor and get it swapped in.